So this is actually December 10th, and it is from 8 to 10:30. It is quite a ways away. I realize that. Okay, that's actually needs to be changed. Okay. Now, if any of you need to change that date or time, please let me know. Okay. So it will be December 10th. I think it's a Tuesday. Chapters 10, 11, 12. It's going to be 50 questions, multiple choice. So you'll know exactly what your last grade is at that very moment. There's also 5 questions worth 2 points apiece. If you wanted to tackle the bonus questions, they're open for 2 minutes. So you got 2 minutes to try to answer those questions. Okay. Okay, so let us move on and we will finish chapter 12. I will have all of the videos posted by this afternoon. Okay. Yes. Right. There are no position papers left. All right. We will just use the one position paper that we have for the average grade. You'll just go with one. Okay. Cool. All right. So let us move on and finish chapter 12. So we talked about the reasons why you build channel relationships. We talked about ultimately we want to be able to build an enduring competitive advantage, one that stands out and is stronger than others. I've always said kind of that eBay and Amazon are almost built on the same model, but Amazon did one thing that eBay didn't do, and that was to centralize shipping. And Amazon did that better, far better than eBay ever could. And it's just that one thing, if you think about it, shipping, which gives Amazon such an enduring competitive advantage. This is an example where channels is a superior product, regardless of the physical product itself, and definitely differentiation as a distributor is the ability to add value-added services. And so those things can be done with strong channel relationships. They also create a high-end barrier for those individuals to make it more difficult for them to leave. And so these are the main reasons, especially if you're a downstream member. You have an assured, stable supply of products that are desired by consumers. And even though they may not necessarily generate you steady incomes, or let's just say high incomes, they can generate you steady practice, which is just as important. So, how effective are strong channel relationships? Well, we find this is that strong relationships pay off in higher loyalty, higher sales, and greater cooperation. We're going to show you a study of that in a minute. We also know this, as I talked about commitment trust theory with Shelby Hunt, that trust is a very strong driver of commitment. And it's important to say that it is a necessary but insufficient by itself part of driving commitment. Trust. It gives you confidence in the partner's future actions. But it also states that the future actions are desirable actions as well. Like anything, however, strong relationships take time and effort to create and maintain, and must be in many ways fostered. And so, what is the empirical support for relationships? So, if you ever do research, a meta-analysis is basically a research paper on research, all right? What a meta-analysis does is it puts together journal publications, and when you search for particular words, it will take all of the journal articles that are associated with that. And so what a meta-analysis did of 20 years of research on the effect of trust and commitment and relationships, it gave us 38,000 relationships. So this particular thing that's called an R is very important for us in research. The R tells you how much of the relationship is explained by this one particular parameter. And so what this says is relationships have a strong effect on word of mouth, which is important. Word of mouth is the number one thing we will trust versus standard advertisements, which are propaganda. And so we have a strong effect on word of mouth, a strong effect on loyalty, and the last one to me is the most important because none of those things mean anything unless it's actually meaning you're performing in a superior way. And that's what the objective performance means. So ultimately what this is it shows that the body of research supports the contention that strong relationships are vital. And so we talked about how we go about finding commitment. And here we are now. Okay. Commitment makes you feel as a relationship is going to be a continuing process. Commitment increases where there's trust. When there is a two-way communication with each other, and even if it is functional conflict in which we are in disagreement with each other, where if we have a reputation for fair dealing and a stable relationship, we are willing to continue the relationship. And so commitment increases with trust, with two-way communication, reputation for fair dealing, a strong, stable relationship, balanced power. Balanced power does not mean symmetric, all right? There can be asymmetry in it, but you have a balance between them. And then the last is common goals. And this can be antithetical. We consider that organizations have their own reasons for existence, but if we can line up behind common goals, then ultimately what we do is we drive commitment. So, one of the things that we learn, especially when it comes with others, are that people are very poor actors. You can be fooled by them in a short term, but ultimately in the long term, those kind of things break down. Deception is very rarely works to a long-term way. And ultimately, what we know is that organizations don't look at intentions by what partners say, but what they do. We are known by our deeds, not by our words. At any point there is what is considered an unbalanced commitment, then ultimately that will create a negative change. But how do we have commitment? One party, whoever that party is, needs to make a choice to commit to the other. To increase the commitment, it requires one side increase the commitment and allow the concept of reciprocity to raise the mutual levels. So what is reciprocity? Reciprocity ultimately means for this, I will do this. I will do more for you, and I expect the more to come back. Now, this can be very disheartening sometimes, especially when the commitment isn't returned. But that's the nature of relationships. You do it anyway. So, how do you build commitment? So, one of the ways that you can do it is by being more selective as a distributor. We're talking about the manufacturer at the very top. You may need more than one organization in order to achieve and build some kind of success, but you deliberately are selective because that selectivity allows itself to have a greater or more direct commitment. If you allow your supplier to do the selling for you and maintain what are known as house accounts. So a house account, by the way, is a very, very large account that the organization deals with directly as a manufacturer. And so when I was talking about Moody Price with stainless steel, an example would be a Swedge lock worked directly to them. If you could, if you would allow the wholesalers, salespeople to, in essence, maintain those house accounts and be your representative, you increase the trust because you, in essence, treat them as a partner. So being selective is a strategy for building commitment. You demonstrate that you're willing to not avail yourself of other partners, and you'll stick with just one. So we talked about idiosyncratic investments when we were talking about vertical market, and here's that word again, idiosyncratic. Idiosyncratic means that you have investments that are dedicated to the relationship, which cannot be redeployed in any other way. And so an example of this is, once again, is Steel Tools, who will invest money in adding to your particular building by something to the effect of 30%. They will actually pay for you to build on your building, even when it doesn't have anything to do with Steel Tools. And so anything, a credible commitment or pledge, a unique investment in that group that can't be redeployed, basically says, I'm willing to throw money into your situation, even though I will never get anything back out of it. It has just as much power as reciprocity does when you're giving and the expectation is you get nothing back. And so that's one way of building commitment. So think of it this way: if you're a supplier, so you receive that commitment and they invest in you, that means that you could have greater selectivity. It means that you expect that your partner has more empathy for your position. And hopefully what that will ultimately do is lead to less conflict. And then other things that you can do is that you start to try to make their business better in the long term. You share with them the innovations, your information sharing that you have. All of that helps to build greater commitment. And so that is how you build commitment. You invest, you make actions, you don't say things, you do things. That's how you do it. So we talked about commitment. Once again, I've been referring to this article. I want to show it again because, yes, it'll come up as a test question, maybe a bonus one. And it is at the very top. And that is Morgan Hunt Commitment Trust. That's the article that I'm referencing to when I talk about commitment and trust. This is also that article that I showed you when we talked about, I'm using words that come from research like functional conflict. So I wanted you to make sure that I showed you this again. There's also one more article that we're going to talk about, and this is the maker of your particular book, Palantir, and this is an article on relationship velocity. be talking about that in just a few seconds. All right. Those sound like a couple of bonus questions to me. All right. So what is trust? So just to kind of let you know where my kind of research I'm doing. So I'm doing research on artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, and I've started to dig into something pretty esoteric, and that's the thought of trust. And so I've looked at trust. There's so many definitions of what trust is. Trust in terms of a sociological event between individuals in a society, how you build trust in that way. Cognitive trust, which is our ability to logically assess trust, and then emotional trust or affect-based trust. I just believe in that person. And with all of these definitions, I've just been interested how all of this is going to relate to AI. But let's go and see what is trust for the definition that you're going to need for the test. Well, trust is easy to recognize. It's difficult to define. But the way you look at trust is you conceptualize it as the partner's willingness to be honest, which means to fulfill their obligations and are sincere in their words. You perceive that the party is benevolent and they want to help you. There's a confidence that those individuals are generally interested in my welfare and my interests. And so that is the most basic conceptualization as trust, is that the other party is honest and that they act in a benevolent way towards each other. So with that backdrop of trust, how do we drive trust, which is vitally important for building commitment? Well, first thing we do is we create economic satisfaction in our partner. So economic satisfaction is a positive, that word affective is emotion, all right? So economic satisfaction is a positive affective response to the economic rewards generated in a relationship. Now, when we talk about economic rewards, it's important to understand that the rewards don't have a particular dollar amount because everybody reacts in a different way. Monetary rewards, anything like that. Once you increase the economic satisfaction, there's the willingness to understand that my partner wishes me to perform financially better. There's a greater satisfaction between the parties because we're willing to make investments in each other as well. Now we talked about idiosyncratic investments. Generic investments are a greater risk, but they also drive trust. So what is a generic investment? I'm going to teach you something unique and special about a particular product, so much so that you as a salesperson will be able to achieve superior results by knowing this. They just told me this particular thing. I have the possibility, if I wanted to use this any way I wanted to. So in other words, the generic investment lifts me up, but actually in one way can make me more independent from my partner if I wanted to be. This is an example of an investment that is risky. A genuine broadening of product knowledge would be one of those things. An understanding of something that's coming down in the future. The buzz when Nintendo Wii came out 18 months before, and they were sliding into bankruptcy very slowly, the buzz was that they've got this new interface. It's going to change everything. And that was a risky investment for Nintendo to spread that kind of information, especially if they weren't going to be able to deliver, but they did spectacular. Economic satisfaction, drive your partner to achieve greater rewards. non-economic satisfaction, this is when we start talking about what we talked about last week is procedural and distributive fairness. If you remember one of the conflict protocols for being able to solve conflict, one of them was a deeply involved step in going through the processes to try to help your partners, not by being accommodating, but also being problem solving. The willingness to get into the whole sausage making of problems and trying to help them find their way out. That is what's called a non-coercive way of being able to help them. You try to help them solve your problems. And they believe you because those are bound up in perceptions of fairness. And let's revisit this again. And so we talked about these procedural fairness. And this could also be justice. And procedural fairness is being treated fairly in a day-to-day manner or in through day-to-day interactions. And so in every interaction between you and your channel partner, it is fair in just the daily activities between each other. You're not trying to prosecute an individual for doing something that might have been wrong. You trust them in your normal activities. You don't penalize them other than if there's something on the contracts. That's procedural fairness. Distributive fairness or justice is being treated fairly in distribution of rewards. I know that's kind of tautological because you've got the word distribution in there, but it means that, all right? So fairness, procedural fairness means every day I'm being treated in a fair manner. In distributive, when it comes to the rewards, those are distributed fairly amongst everyone involved. There may be no more damaging thing to commitment and trust than the perception of unfairness. It undermines trust. It leads to higher levels of conflict. It makes everything just bad. All right. So how do we go about choosing partners? If selectivity is one of those ways in which we can increase commitment and trust, how do we do that? Well, many wholesalers and retailers have no qualifying strategy whatsoever. In other words, because of the need to be able to distribute them anywhere, they'll sell to anyone. So when we bought our Commodore 64s for Fatima, when I was in Lafayette, we just simply sent a cashier's check to the dealer in Houston. That's all we had to do. There was no screening, none of that. Doesn't matter, okay? But if we really want to have a greater commitment and trust, we have to develop some kind of strategies about how we go about finding potential partners. This is one of the reasons why, in many ways, Chick-fil-A is so successful. Chick-fil-A does not care about the franchise fees. It's like $5,000. but it takes 4 years for you to qualify to be able to have a franchise. The screening does its job. It depends just on what you consider to be the model in which you want to achieve success. The greater the commodity of the item, let me put it that way, the greater the generic parts of it, then there's not going to be as much of a great need. The customization of it, in other words, the success of it, means that you've got to tweak the product. Definitely, you're going to want to be able. So, as I've said before, unfairness is relationship acid. There can be no more, there can be no more greater thing that can erode commitment and trust than to be perceived as being unfair to another partner. That includes distributive fairness or justice and procedural fairness or justice. And that's the ways that you measure those. Those are the two ways in which we have fairness or justice. And so, the last part of this, we're going to talk about the channel relationship life cycle. And I need to go dig to find this particular slide. So give me just a second. Okay. All right. Here we go. So, as with everything, relationships go through a cycle. Understanding where we are in each point of that relationship helps us to understand what level of commitment and what actions we need to perform in order to maintain a long-term relationship. Now, not all relationships go through these cycles. It is very possible that during these, that you can slide from awareness to commitment like overnight. There's nothing linear about these things. That's the whole point of what relationship velocity is. But when we're talking about the relationship cycle, these are the 5 steps, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go through all 5, but these are the 5 recognized unique. So the first one is awareness. So when I worked for the computer store, Omni Computer Store in Lafayette, there were 2 other computer stores in Lafayette at the same time. There was Entree, there was Intercom, and we all kind of knew each other. It's not like we knew each other going out to dinner or whatever, but that's where we were. We were on this awareness phase. So in the awareness phase, one organization sees the other. And there's a kind of a recognition that they could possibly partners together. There's very little interaction, but we know each other. We know who works for who. Sometimes we might ask a favor because you never know when you're going to need a favor. So, you know, there is that kind of reciprocity between each other. It's important to be physically near each other. The wider it makes it a little bit more difficult. You might have had experience in transactions with other domains. So we had, we were selling AutoCAD at the time. we put together an engineering package, but the AutoCAD, the writing in Lisp and all the other things, we had an independent contractor who kind of helped us. And this independent contractor knew others. So this is the kind of network, it kind of just aware of each other, but it's not necessarily like we're interacting. So the next is exploration. We kind of do these testing things on both sides. We'll make minor transactions. You might find that we have to do certain things and that drives you towards another. You start to more recognize that individual, but you kind of get to know them, their nature, motives, and you start to see a growth of interdependence. You reveal a little bit about each other. And you see if that reveal is a safe. You start to have a greater sensitivity towards being procedurally and distributively fair with those individuals. And so you build trust by doing the actions which hopefully gravitate that. Norms begin to happen, relational norms. We all have ways in which we greet each other, we say hello to each other. There is kind of the expectation, you start to draw inferences from the future. This is also a phase where you could easily terminate on either side as well, if you find that there is no compatibility in what you're doing. Now, in expansion, interdependence expands, the benefits expands, but the expansion can be extremely rapid, all right? And this is that whole point about this, and that is about relationship velocity. So Palmentier wrote this article, and what he basically explained is that relationships over time are not linear. They all of a sudden increase dramatically and can decrease just as dramatically as well. And so that's the point of what relationship, we're never, in other words, nobody's going to go down a general path that we're very going to slowly, it happens overnight, okay? Like real people, okay? So expansion grows, satisfaction leads to greater motivation. We start to have goal convergence. We start to move together in a defined direction. Our communication and interaction increases. Alternative partners start to look less attractive. Remember, the commitment is also a limitation, but the limitation is balanced by the benefits of the interaction, okay? The difficulty with this is that, well, not difficulty, but the key feature is you have to maintain the momentum. Each party seeks new areas to entertain each other. You create mutual payoffs. And so cooperation, goal congruence, communication, all increase, and they increase with rapidity, and that's with relationship velocity. Relationship velocity is basically the fact that relationships are not linear. Then you finally reach to commitment. This is where each party is dedicated themselves to maintaining the relationship. In commitment also, you have the expectation of a long-term horizon. You have other parties out there that you're aware of, but you don't court them. There are high expectations on both sides, high dependence, high trust, high commitment. You work to resolve your conflicts together as partners. There's continuity across changing environments. You start to have shared values, and there is a mutual dependence on each other. And the key features are you have loyalty, you're willing to adapt with your partner, and you are there for continuity. And so the last step, if it happens at all, is decline and dissolution. Generally, this happens from one side. Rarely is there a mutual dissolution. There's mounting dissatisfaction. One side holds back their investment. It provokes the other to reciprocate, and it can be abrupt or it can be gradual. You just remember it takes two to build, but only one to undermine. And many times decline happens without one of the parties or even both parties even knowing. It just happens. All right. So these are the 5 stages of relationships. So some things to note with this is, remember that relationships are not linear. They're not orderly. They don't go through the 5 stages. Okay. It's just people, all right? And nothing progresses in an orderly fashion with that. So what are your strategies at each stage? In the early stages, you wish to communicate and to share your expertise. The idiosyncratic and generic investments are more important than the other to be able to achieve reciprocity. In the mid kind of commitment level, you continue to make deeper investments in time and effort and the willingness to stay together. And then in the late term, in the commitment stages, above all, avoid neglect and even worse, betrayal. Because if you betray, then you create unfairness. So, what is the secret? So how do you manage relationships, or how do you do it successfully? Well, relationships require maintenance, and they can even wear out if maintained properly. It is a cycle, and nothing stays forever. Some relationships can stand suspicion better than others, but not all do. And so what is the secret? Test question. What is the secret to managing relationships? In channels, it is to have more than one partner. Not do this in your personal life. But let's just say I hadn't figured it out. Anyway, have a broad portfolio of channel partners, all of them at different stages in the relationship process, so that what you've done is you've diversified risk. All of those relationships, every one of those will be in different stages, and you'll know them and recognize them. And you certainly wouldn't want to have just one supplier. That would be just not good. Okay. And so that's how you manage it. Relationships can be difficult and sticky, especially when it comes to organizational memory and structures and those things, but they're worth it because, as I've said before, people are what make these things drive. And we're done. We're done with the class. We're done with everything. So is there any questions before we go? So just remember, December 10th, 8 o'clock, you'll have 2.5 hours to take the test. That's just the one test. If you want to take the bonus ones, they're free. So it's 110 points out of a possible 100. Okay. All right, folks, it's been a pleasure. Yes.
And the final exam is required. Everyone has to take the final.
If you are satisfied, remember this, it's your top 3 grades.
Okay.
So if you've got the top 3 grades and you're fine with it, then you don't have to take it. Okay. Okay. All righty. Take care, folks. We'll see you.